Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Emmanuel I. Smith, and this is a prelude to my next lecture, Societal Narratives. And, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to give you some semblance ahead of time what you're in for. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme and overarching law of the land. There's simply no way around that. All laws that are passed in the United States, anywhere in the country, have to be in line philosophically with the United States Constitution. Otherwise, that law is not valid. And whether that law comes from the president, whether that law comes from Congress, whether it comes from a governor, a mayor, a state legislature, a city council, the Supreme Court itself, or any federal, state, or local courtroom, okay, it has to be in line with the United States Constitution. Otherwise, it's just words. It's just words on its face, okay? Now, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, the United States Constitution is formed and fashioned as such so that any person born into this country can enjoy its liberties, its freedoms, and its precepts freely. That's the point of it. It was meant to infuse freedom, liberty, and justice all into one document. It is not a decoration. Okay, the United States Constitution is a legally binding document. All right, it's not an embellishment. And it's not something that we just walk up to and take pictures of. It is a law. And regardless of the generation you were raised in, regardless of the neighborhood, the circumstances, the tax bracket you were raised in, the Constitution of the United States applies to all U.S. citizens equally. And ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, over the past 200 years, the past 250 years, there have been a number of governments, a number of officials, a number of corporate entities that have fallen short of those constitutional precepts, and their activity had to be ruled unconstitutional and thus repealed. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I want to live in a country where everything under the sun is constitutional. Otherwise, what do we have? We have political dissidents. We have American dissident voices like mine. We have American dissident positions that we take. We have American dissident concerns and issues that we have. We have American dissident forces in play. The kinds of American dissident forces that will threaten to undermine the image and reputation of the United States around the world. Okay, no one wants to see that. I don't want to see that. I want constitutional rights, freedoms, and liberties respected. And that is the basis of my project. Thank you for listening.
No me hace falta, no me hace falta.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Friday, March 27th, 2026. The time is 6:46 p.m., and I'm in Miami-Dade County, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is Societal Narratives, Constitutional Label. And I'll let you know, ladies and gentlemen, that I tend to do these lectures outdoors, and I may have to raise or project my voice from time to time in order to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volume accordingly, and thank you for tuning in. As I observe my surroundings with increased intensity and vigilance and perspective, ladies and gentlemen, I begin to realize that Gangstalking's auspices have roots in sociological dynamics, indeed in societal dynamics, in the very dynamics that are present in American society altogether. When you look at generations in the United States, typically every 18 years or so you have a new generation. So, for example, if you look at the baby boomer generation, that generation consists of people that were born from 1946 to 1963. Then if you look at the next generation, which is Generation X, these are people born from 1964 to 1982. And then if you look at the millennial generation, these are people that are born from 1983 to 2001. And then the following generation is Generation Z, which is 2002 to 2020. And then that's Generation Z, and then from 2021 to 2039, that's Generation Alpha. So we have different generations that are spawned, or rather recreated, or rather reproduced every 18 years. And it's interesting to watch how people from different generations evolve psychologically over the years. It's interesting to see what the state of affairs of the United States becomes as each generation matures into adulthood, and what the contributions of each generation is to American society in general. You know, what trends arise with each new generation? What kind of news events are produced because of the actions of each generation? What are the consumer trends and the sociological trends and the economic trends and the trends in entertainment consumption? All right, the trends in high school graduation, the trends in college graduation, the trends in technological innovations that arise when new generations mature into adulthood and actually start having an effect on American society and indeed the global community. It's interesting to see how the landscape, the sociological landscape of the United States changes with the coming and goings of the generations. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, generations are unique from one another in a number of ways. The kinds of news stories that the baby boomer generation were exposed to growing up shapes their worldview. The kinds of technology that these generations have at their disposal as children, teenagers, and young adults affects their worldview. Political events and foreign relations, as they were during the times of different generations and different points in times, affects that generation's worldview. Every generation was raised in different times, had different access to different technologies, had different trends and sociological norms that dominated during the time of their upbringing. And obviously media and entertainment plays a role in the worldview of different generations. The times, okay, and the socioeconomic and socio-political climates that are present during the upbringing of various generations affects their perspective of the people around them, of the global society, and what it means to be a productive citizen in the country that you live. I think that my generation, the millennial generation, was especially unique, and I think our generation, in the grand scheme of things, has had a unique relationship with former and latter generations. probably more so than others because of the times that we grew up in and how those times affected our worldview. Okay? And I want to tie these narratives into gangstalking and then later again into constitutional considerations. Because first and foremost, our generation, although we are the generation that was exposed to what you might refer to as antisocial influences on the world stage, especially in media and entertainment, more so than other generations, and that affected our worldview in such a way that I think other generations look at the millennial generation with peculiarity, oftentimes even with suspicion. And this definitely plays into the gangstalking narrative and into constitutional rights as well, because millennials are still U.S. citizens. We still have all the same rights and liberties as any other generation. And I think that when you're talking about something like clandestine gangstalking and its effect on the global community, particularly in the United States, however, from a sociological standpoint, I think that the millennial generation needs a second look because, you know, having been raised in this generation myself, I can attest to a number of things. All right. First and foremost, the millennial generation was no more disruptive to American society or the global community than any other generation. I mean, ultimately, so our generation, yeah, we were the Saturday morning cartoons generation, okay? We absorbed lots of soap operas, which oftentimes had sexually explicit or sexually raunchy themes. All right, we were the Jerry Springer generation. We remember sitting in living rooms watching the Jerry Springer show on television, which was actually a very well-produced and very dynamic television program that exposed the millennial generation growing up to all kinds of raucous themes and antisocial behaviors, some of which millennials looked at and said, wow, that's kind of neat, actually. That's cool, that's trendy, that's hip, that's how I want to be, etc., etc. Okay, some look at millennials as the rap music generation, okay, as the generation that consumed the most rap music, that oftentimes had lyrics that glorified raunch and illegal activities and antisocial behaviors. You know, we were the generation of lots of tattoos, which, I mean, quite frankly, if you look at the world around you, particularly here in the United States, you know, you'll see people in their late 30s and 40s and even in their early 50s. Well, not quite the 50s, but mid to late 30s and early to mid 40s. People with gigantic tattoos all over their body. I mean, that is an indicator that person was immersed in millennial culture as a youth. Lots of drug experimentation, very little marriage, lots of cohabitating, lots of children being born outside of the confines of wedlock, which in my opinion is not an evil thing at all. I mean, two people make a conscious decision to procreate, that's between them and their creator. But you also had a situation where you had persons in this generation looking at quite a bit of, playing quite a bit of video games. Okay, video games. During the upbringing of the millennial generation, we saw innovation after innovation after innovation of video games. I mean, most millennials remember playing games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, which was an 8-bit video game system. Then next thing you know, when we're in 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, now here comes the Super Nintendo. So now we're playing that. It's got 16-bit graphics. Then comes the Sega Genesis. It's got 16-bit graphics. All right. Then within the video arcade mechanism was booming at the time. You could go to your local video game arcade with a pocket full of quarters, and you got to play some of the most amazingly designed video games you could ever imagine. On joystick kiosks, or you could sit down in a booth that had sort of a racing car set up in it, and you could do a racing car simulation. And we had arm wrestling simulators and quarterback football simulators and basketball simulators where you could win prizes and things like that. I mean, video games and the arcade game mechanism ruled the 80s and 90s. I mean, and then when you started getting more sophisticated video game systems like the Nintendo 64 and the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast, which all came into the market all within a few years of each other, from the 1997 to 2001 range. You had lots of millennials and some Generation Xers too, jumping into these things. It was like going into a new time warp, a new dimension. Okay, another time space with these amazingly developed video games, and some of them had violence in them. Some of them had more of a strategic element to them. Some of them had a more hands-eye coordination element to them, and some of them were sports video games. But regardless of what your preference was in video games, there's no doubt that millennial culture was in many respects beholden to what the next awesome video game system was going to be. And a lot of baby boomer parents and even some Generation X parents that gave birth to millennials remember those times. Okay, going to your local Target, going to your local Walmart, going to your local Best Buy, going to your local Toys R Us, going to your local electronics store, your Radio Shacks and so forth, and purchasing the latest video games and gaming equipment for your kids, with the expectation that they'd be occupied in a way that made them happy. A lot of a millennials' worldview was shaped by the kinds of things we saw on these video games. And you know, when you started getting even more sophisticated video game platforms, like, for example, the PlayStation 1s and the PlayStation 2s and the Xboxes, which started coming out more towards the time where a good many millennial gamers were entering high school or already in their high school years. Now their worldview from childhood to young adulthood is being influenced further by video games. And quite frankly, I think video games made the millennial generation imaginative. I don't think video games degenerated the thinking or the worldview of millennial people. I think that they enhanced the worldview of millennial people, because it gave you some semblance of what the human mind was capable of with respect to the development of software and electronic devices that allowed you to control advanced on-screen scenarios. And as video games started becoming more interactive, you started seeing online video games where you could play against other people around the world if you wanted to online. and join clubs and things like that and earn rewards through PlayStation and Microsoft and quite a few video game developers and manufacturers. And I think that some of the themes that were present in the video games that millennials in particular played, and to a lesser degree Generation Xers, it got into government workings. I mean, a lot of the video games that millennials played had themes of exposing corruption. Okay, you're a ninja, for example, in one game, and your objective is to defeat all the henchmen and discover secret government experiments concerning the cloning of super soldiers, or something to that effect. Or, for example, that game there I'm thinking of, I think, was Ninja Gaiden. But you have other games too, like Resident Evil, which was a hugely popular game in millennial culture, where you controlled a few soldiers in a zombie apocalypse, and these zombies are being created by a evil corporation called Umbrella Corporation, and you had to beat all the zombies and make it to the end bosses so you could defeat the people that were creating these zombies. Okay, you had other video games that explored similar topics. For example, there was a game that was really popular in the early 90s called Golgo 13, where you played I believe he was a Russian spy. It was a Russian spy or a Japanese spy was the main character, and you had to go through these levels, and you had to make it to basically a Nazi bunker that had a resurrected Adolf Hitler clone that you had to kill, and then basically blow up this big laboratory full of Adolf Hitler clones and save the world, so that these Hitler clones wouldn't all get together and conspire on how to take over the world. You see, I mean, as outlandish and far out as these scenarios sound, you played these games as a youth, and it expanded your mind as what the possibilities were to widespread corporate or governmental power, how devastating it could be. And in saving the world, you, at some point during your playing of these games, come to the realization that, wow, I wonder where these stories came from. I wonder what would happen if this corporation or that corporation, or this government auxiliary or that government auxiliary actually decided to try something like this. What would happen? Okay, so millennials had this sort of almost like an alternative universe, really, that sort of set deep down inside the psyche of the millennial generation towards the world around them. And then when you look at things like, for example, the rise of commercial internet, which happened in 1995, this intensified millennials' interest in what you don't know. What don't we know? What can Yahoo, America Online, Google, what can these search engines teach me about the world around me that I don't already know? What can I learn from these search engines that I'm not learning in high school or college? You see? So when the internet became commercially available, that was in the young lives of a lot of millennials. I mean, 1995 is when it became commercially available. The oldest millennial in 1995 was only 12 years old. All right. So when the internet became commercially available, that became a big part of young millennials' lives, young millennials' upbringings, young millennials' development of the world around them. So when you factor these things in, and then when you come to the realization that the early internet was essentially a wild west of websites that anyone could access anytime, day or night, you started seeing a lot of young millennials coming across information and websites and narratives and things of that nature that were more suited for the adult mind, but millennials were consuming these things at a young age. And because of the free and open nature of the internet, a lot of millennials found that freedom to be liberating. And a lot of millennials got addicted to the internet. Some millennials got addicted to video games. All right. And, there were a lot of millennials that were at this same time already addicted to cartoons and movies, because this was also the onset of dish cable, where a person could go and buy a dish and instantly you have access to 300 channels 24 hours a day. And it was a deviation from standard cable, which gave you maybe 30 channels or 50 channels, and a huge deviation from analog television, which gave you access to maybe 10 channels. And you didn't necessarily have to go rent or buy lots of movies, because you could go onto your Dish network and watch any number of movies right there as included in your subscription. So, when you look at all of the entertainment and media venues that millennials had access to growing up, it's going to give you some semblance as to how millennial mindsets differed from the mindsets of, say, Generation Xers or baby boomers, and also Generation Z, which is starting to reach adulthood now. And the reason I think millennials have a unique worldview to other generations is because I think that the baby boomer generation basically they're the sons and daughters of a lot of World War II veterans, and the sons and daughters of the baby explosion that happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s after World War II concluded. These persons, these baby boomers, were raised typically by very hardworking, very industrious, very resourceful parents. Okay, and their parents prepared them, the baby boomers, for a career in the workforce from a very young age. And baby boomers didn't really have that much in the way of entertainment to distract them from finding careers. Okay, video games were limited to whatever you could play in an arcade, or whatever you could find in the way of very basic video games like Atari or something like that. The baby boomers didn't have much to distract them from their future in the workforce. Furthermore, movies were limited mostly to, whatever you could find in theaters. You could go to local theaters to watch movies, and then when you went home, you only had 5 or 6 channels to choose from with respect to whatever television programming you wanted to consume. So And aside from that, you know, you had comic books, which were a form of entertainment for baby boomers, a lot of them coming up. But aside from these media sources, the baby boomers didn't have much to distract them from what kind of career they wanted to go into. Okay. You know, they probably hung out with their friends outside more, probably played more sports, probably did more reading, probably did more outdoor activities and exercise and things like that than the millennials did in particular, because the millennials had more in the way of home entertainment, okay, to keep them indoors. Or the ones that even did like to do outdoorsy stuff, at some point, you know, they were going to go somewhere and pick up a Game Boy, a Nintendo Game Boy, or a Sega Game Gear, or some other handheld video game device and occupy their time with that, or sit around and talk with their friends about their favorite movies and video games. I mean, that was a favorite pastime of millennials coming up. So millennial culture was in many respects dominated by the entertainment that we consumed. And, you know, when you get into your teenage years, you begin to realize that the entertainment you're consuming and you have consumed growing up, you know, in the way of television, movies, action movies were huge in millennial culture. A lot of these movies examined risque things, provocative things, and various themes that you might consider adult in nature, okay? And there was no escaping it. I mean, anytime you turned on the television and it wasn't a news program, okay, if it was a music video channel, or if it was some other channel that explored entertainment, or a channel that had movies like, for example, Showtime or HBO, there was always an abundance of movies available. And among millennial culture, if the movie wasn't PG-13 or R, it typically wasn't seen as acceptable because it was not going to be seen as fast-paced or interesting. And similarly, when you factor in the abundance of adult-rated programming, particularly those associated with the late-night cable movies, which some might refer to as softcore pornography, where it was basically actors simulating sex acts in movies. There wasn't any actual sex happening, to the full-blown XXX movies that became available on cable and dish. You had a lot of millennials at young ages, typically in the first 17 years of their life, consuming that out of curiosity. And then when you throw in the online pornographic material that became very popular in the United States among all the generations, it wasn't just the millennials, all the generations of every racial background was consuming that. And you had tens of billions of adult website pages visited by people of all generations and races and socioeconomic backgrounds constantly throughout the day. And it got to a point where the most viewed websites on the entire internet throughout the United States were pornographic websites. There were more people, okay, men, women, and juveniles, accessing those websites than any other type of website on the internet, and for more hours a day. So that became sort of the American pastime, you know. Up until the 2000s, the American pastime, I think, was basketball, football, and baseball. But after 2000, the year 2000, when people started discovering how easy it was to get their hands on online porn, The new American pastime became looking at online porn. And that has been the American pastime ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what you say. I mean, you had people identifying as Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, Muslim, whoever, jumping online at all hours of the day in various intervals, just looking at as much online X-rated activity as they could. And then when you take that and then you mix it with the copious use of exotic marijuana strains, which became very popular in millennial culture in the early to late 2000s. All right. And then, the various other drugs that were very popular among millennials, like exotic mushrooms and window pane acid and various other substances. You combine these factors together, it creates for a very chaotic worldview. And even though the entire world was consuming this stuff, people wanted to blame it all on millennials. They were like, well, this is all your fault. I think other generations who were ashamed of having jumped into this culture of hedonistic libertinism started getting ashamed of themselves and ashamed of their country, especially after it got exposed that there were social media and search engines in the United States that were selling user information. I think a lot of people said, all those hundreds of thousands of porn websites I visited last year, that information is getting sold to third parties with my name attached to it. Okay, I want Google held responsible. I want Facebook held responsible. I want this company and that company held responsible. And we're getting ready to blame the millennials for the degeneration of culture that they've brought. It's the millennials' fault. They're the ones that made rap available. They're the ones that consumed all this porn and made it fashionable. They're the ones that made cussing fashionable. They're the ones that made disgusting vernacular fashionable. They're the ones that made all these sexually charged TV programs fashionable. They're the ones that made all this video game addiction fashionable and all the raunch that's in some of those video games. They're the ones that made nasty cartoons fashionable. They're the ones, the millennials, that made the out-of-wedlock births and the cohabitation shacking up mechanism fashionable. We're going to blame it on them. We'll make the millennials the dark sheep or the black sheep of today's world. They're the ones that brought all this anti-Christian morality on the rest of us. Right? We need somebody to blame. All right? For the degeneration of American culture. This culture is no longer as Christian as it could be because of them. All right, so I think in many respects, a lot of unfair abuse has befallen the millennial generation because of our propensity to absorb entertainment and cultural norms that were seen as libertine or hedonistic or self-serving in nature. And I think a lot of millennials are nowadays, as they enter their middle-aged years, are distancing themselves from that life, almost with some guilt as to having been a part of that culture for so long. Me personally, I make no apologies for it. You can't help the times that you're grown up in. And quite frankly, human nature is what it is. I mean, you're growing up, you have all of these entertainment venues available to you. You want to know about the world around you so you consume it. Television, movie, music, video games, what have you, you want to consume it. And as much of it as possible so you can have a better understanding of the world around you. Okay, millennials did nothing wrong in consuming the entertainment and media that was being produced during their young and teenage years. Millennials did nothing wrong in consuming these things during their 20s and 30s either. Okay? There's an old saying that says that people are products of their environment. Well, you are a product of your environment. You're a product of your home environment. You're a product of your neighborhood. You're a product of your community. You're a product of the city and state you live in. You're a product of the country you live in. You're a product of the global community that you were raised in. And these communities, these environments shape your worldview. I don't think vilifying the millennial generation because of the unique sociological influences that they had growing up is right or a fair thing to do. And quite frankly, it's pitiful because when you throw in, for example, you look at gangstalking, for example. I mean, you got people of all generations participating in it, even millennials. You even got millennials, which was the don't tread on me generation, right? We're going to expose corruption generation, right? We're going to tell you all about, and we're going to consume information related to, well, whether or not there's an alien conspiracy to implement an Illuminati and an Illuminati conspiracy to implement some sort of a world order, and a world order conspiracy to annihilate half the population and start a new order of very robotic, very complacent human beings throughout the world, that type of thing. I mean, these are the types of narratives that a lot of millennials consumed in their teenage years and in their 20s. Now, not so much anymore. I mean, we know now that there's not an Illuminati. Okay, we know now that there's not any type of a mechanism where you can sell your soul to Satan in exchange for riches or influence. Okay, we know now that there's not some Catholic conspiracy to dominate the world, okay, and turn everybody into zombie-like lemmings that drink fluoridated water and have no opinions of our own. Okay, we know that these things were fun conspiracy theories while they were trending on various online resources. Nowadays, I think more persons in these varied generations that consume that type of material are more into how to stabilize their future for the better, that type of thing. They're growing up, right? But if you were born in between 1982 and 2000, you are oftentimes looked at with a different lens than someone who was born before or after. Okay, you're looked at a little less by your credentials and so forth. And the time that you were born, the years you were born, the generation that you fall into is going to be looked at with respect as to how you're going to be treated, as to how you're going to be observed, as to how you are going to be interacted with by people who have that information. And when you look at gangstalking campaigns, ladies and gentlemen, I'm willing to bet that most targeted individuals in this country are either Generation X or millennials. I don't doubt for one second that there are targeted individuals in the baby boomer generation. And I believe that there are also targeted individuals in the Generation Z generation. But I'm willing to bet, okay, that most targeted persons are Generation X and Millennials, because we grew up in the most antisocial generations that I think this country has seen. And that's pitiful. All right. It's a piss poor excuse for targeting a person, okay, the years that they were raised, and assuming that because they were raised in a specific time frame that they have a worldview that is less than, or a worldview that is raucous, or a worldview that is dirty, or a worldview that is sociologically inferior to other generations. I think that is a cowardly way to treat U.S. citizens that were born in a specific time frame. All right, a time frame that a person is born into does not dictate or determine the content of that person's character. And I don't think that it is beneficial for the United States to go from racial segregation and then inequalities in the workforce to age discrimination and inequalities in American society based on the generation you grew up in. Okay, no doubt the millennials were exposed to lots of libertine activities and behaviors growing up. But again, that's just how the market was. That is just how consumerism was. That is just how the American economy was in those days. Those were the types of products that were on the market. So those were the kinds of products that millennials had access to growing up. And those are the kinds of products that we consumed. So to sort of vilify millennials based on these sets of criteria is it's low. It's low because what you're doing is you're demoralizing and you are disenfranchising an entire segment of the U.S. population based on the years that they were born. Okay? Now, no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you got people that look at these matters with the mindset, and maybe they developed this mindset themselves, or maybe they developed this mindset through their parents, or perhaps through their pastors, or perhaps through whatever political parties that they affiliated with, or perhaps even further than that, the communities they were raised in, what they think of the United States. I mean, you have some people that say, well, the U.S. can do no wrong. The U.S. is the greatest country in the world. The U.S. has been the best at everything worldwide since its inception. The U.S. is blessed by Jesus. The U.S. is blessed by God. The U.S. is blessed by the Holy Spirit. The U.S. is blessed by the holy angels. We have God and trust on our money. We have freedom of worship. You can go to all kinds of churches and get saved and reap the salvations of Jesus here. And on top of that, we have politicians that swear oaths on the Bible. We have judges and lawyers that swear oaths on the Bible. If you want to go to a court of law and testify, you have to swear an oath on the Bible. We are Jesus-loving people. We're a Jesus-loving country. We have in God we trust on our money. We have in God and trust on everything. We have in God and trust in our pledge of allegiance. We have the name of God everywhere, so God must bless America. God bless America. This is our motto. And we are an upright nation. And then when they start hearing about things like MK Ultra and the Contra wars, and when they start hearing about gang stalking, they go, well, I don't believe a word of that. The United States is a Christian country and we're blessed by God. There's no way that any of this type of stuff is happening. This must be just some conspiracy theory that these millennials have drawn up because they're the slacker generation and they have nothing to do but come up with a conspiracy theories, play video games, and drink beer. That's what that generation is known for. The rest of us, well, we're society-loving people. We're contributing members of society. We work hard 9 to 5. We raise healthy families. We abstain from drugs and alcohol. We're responsible with all our habits, and we love God and Jesus. Meanwhile, these millennials are sitting around looking at materials on the internet that would make Larry Flint, founder of Hustler magazine, squirm. Stuff that's so explicit that Playboy magazine won't put anything in it. That Playboy magazine won't have anything to do with it. You millennials look at stuff on the internet that's so explicit that Satan himself turns his head when he sees it. Right? That's what other generations, a lot of them, are saying about millennials, and I think it's unfortunate. I don't think it's all people. Okay, I think that there are Americans that look at millennials the same way they look at any generation, as people who were born into this world in a time warp and consumed what was available to them at the time, etc., etc. Yeah, it affected our worldview, etc., etc. I don't think we're degenerate at all. And I think that millennials have a tendency to hold corporations and governments into account more so than other generations because of the types of materials that we were raised on. Furthermore, millennials were exposed to a lot of political scandals growing up that made us skeptical, a lot of us, of big government and their motives. We also saw a lot of news stories break out about corporate scandals that made us more vigilant consumers than other generations, and I don't think that any apology is due for that. And when you look at the gangstalking situation here in the United States, it's obvious that some of it is aimed at basically chastising millennials into thinking, well, your generation is so degenerate and your generation is so jaded by all the filth you grew up on that the rest of society is scared of you. We're scared. The rest of society is scared of you, you millennials. You're a scary generation. You were raised on video games where you got points for killing your opponents in horrible, gory, and bloody ways. Those are the kinds of video games you millennials were raised on. You millennials were raised on movies that were violent to no end. And on top of that, you listened to music that was violent and horrible. And on top of that, you millennials enjoyed various forms of entertainment that other generations see, and they consider it to be degenerate and deleterious. And I believe that the millennial generation, when it reached adulthood, it had other generations that had observed the kinds of media, the kinds of entertainment, the kinds of video games, the kinds of magazines, the kinds of movies that millennials were raised on. And they were like, you know what, I'm a little skeptical of this generation because of the kinds of media and entertainment that they were raised on. Okay? All I see as a baby boomer, okay, all I see as a Generation Xer, some of them, all I see as a member of this generation or that generation when I see a millennial is a young person aged 18 to 40 years old walking around with those thoughts and images in their mind that were produced by music, video games, magazine, television, and movies that were not the kinds of entertainment that the silent generation or the baby boomer generation were exposed to when they were growing up. Even the Generation X generation, which is the generation that came just before the millennials, were not exposed to the intensely violent, gory, sexually charged type of environment that millennials were raised in. And I think even some Generation Xers step back and say, you know what? I don't know about these millennials either. I think a lot of them are jaded in their minds. And I think a lot of them have the kind of minds that are detrimental to society. And I'm not sure that I want to be too affiliated with them in any capacity. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some hiring managers at various companies that will deny a person's application for employment based on the year they were born. I don't want too many millennials working here now. If you were born in that 1982 to 2000 range, I know the kind of material you were raised on, and I'm not sure I want somebody with that kind of thinking working at this company. So I think that in many respects, because of the materials and the type of environment that millennials were raised on, I think that other generations, particularly in the United States, have looked at that and said, you know what, I think we're going to distance ourselves from this generation. And not just that, I think we're going to be hostile to this generation in many respects. I mean, you got people in other generations like the baby boomer generation, the Gen X generation, and even Generation Z that say this about millennial women. It's like, well, those women grew up in the twerking generation. Those women grew up in the strip club generation. Those women grew up in the twerking music generation. Those are the women that consume large quantities of hip hop growing up. They grew up in the baby mama generation and in the shacking up generation and the cohabitation generation and the getting high all day every day generation, the wake and bake generation. So I don't know, maybe we'll look at them a little less frequently as life partners. Maybe if we just need a quick hookup after the bar, we'll try and find us a millennial girl. And for the guys, I mean, there are other generations that look at millennial men and say, well, you know, you all are the X-rated video game generation. We're not sure we have much use for you at all, aside from comic relief, that kind of thing. And you know, we can invite you over to our house for Sunday dinner so we can all stare at your tattoos and look at how bizarre you look with your tattoos and your stretched out earlobes and your lip rings and your nose rings and the tattoos you got on your forehead and, you know, your Nike Hyperdunk tennis shoes and all that type of stuff you millennials were into, right? So when you look at gangstalking, ladies and gentlemen, and you look at the trajectory of the gangstalking campaign of millennials, a lot of it manifests as a sort of a corrective action mechanism. Okay, well, let's say that the CIA and the Department of Defense are behind gangstalking. All right. Well, let's say hypothetically that we won't pick on the CIA here. Let's just say that elements of the Department of Defense and Justice are the Department of War and the Department of Justice are behind gangstalking, right? I'm inclined to believe that they are more apt to focus their program on millennials as opposed to other generations, because of the perception that we all have these jaded, dirty, libertine brains, that we have these jaded, dirty, libertine minds, and we have this jaded, dirty, libertine worldview because of all the jaded, dirty, libertine music, movies, magazines, cartoons video games and internet websites we used to visit all the time growing up, and that we're a generation of get rich quick schemers and house flippers and investors in multi-level marketing schemes and all that type of stuff, because we don't respect the hard day's work, which is a load of bull crap. But I mean, when a program like this gets implemented, and keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you know, it doesn't take much research, okay, to look back over the past 70 years and look at some of the harmful, bizarre, or deleterious schemes that the U.S. Departments of Defense and Justice have put together to study human behavior. Okay, it doesn't take much. Go back and read my MK Ultra lectures on YouTube. Go back and listen to my lectures on the Contras and the Sandinistas. Go back and listen to some of my lectures on the weapons technologies that are used on American citizens in gang-stalking campaigns. The U.S. federal establishment has authorized the use of biological terrorism against U.S. citizens in gang-stalking campaigns. Okay, finding ways to artificially create sicknesses for people in gang-stalking campaigns to see what their behavior will be before, during, and after these attacks have been leveled against them. Okay, I mean, you have a situation right now where there are federal, state, and local auxiliaries that allow a targeted person's enemies, their proven enemies, access to their location so that they can signal these buffoonish, thuggish, pestering, annoying harassers called gang stalkers to their location using a system of signals, vehicular maneuvers, and verbal commands for no reason other than to pester the person and then scurry off. These are the kinds of things that the U.S. federal establishment of the United States has authorized through its Congress and obviously through its Departments of Defense and Justice. And quite frankly, I have the First Amendment right under the United States Constitution to assert these things. I have the right under the United States Constitution to make my feelings and my thoughts, my attitudes and my perspectives heard. Okay, and not only in private to people, but on public and on the internet. And as a person that values and exercises my First Amendment rights, I'm going to invoke my First Amendment right to my freedom of speech and expression. Having developed these thoughts and ideas over the past, in particular, over the past 10 years in particular, based on experiences that I've had as a United States citizen living in the United States. I am here to let my country and indeed the entire world know that I am not on board with this organized stalking and harassment mechanism that I'm seeing in the United States. I think it's disgusting. I think it's hostile. I think it's violent. I think it's annoying. I think it's wasteful. It's a distraction from anything else that I could be doing productive with my time. And I think it's rooted in hatred of oneself, hatred of your fellow Americans, and hatred of the world around you. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's a shame that these gang stalking mechanisms have manifested in such a way so as to disenfranchise millennials and people from generations that have become the scapegoat for the moral degradation of society. I mean, and quite frankly, it's going a little deeper than that. it's going a little deeper than that. I mean, this so-called degradation of society, it's not just being blamed on millennials. It's in many respects being blamed on subunits within the millennial generation. I mean, down here in Miami-Dade County, there are a lot of people of foreign backgrounds that will treat persons of African American descent with particular hostility, and they'll cite rap music. They'll say, well, your people brought rap music to the forefront of the U.S. Imagination, and that's some of the most dirty, violent music that's ever existed in the trajectory of this country. And your people were the ones that brought it here, and your people were the ones that made it popular. And this rap music that's so dirty and disgusting, your people are the ones that made it prevalent. So we're going to blame the degradation in American society on your people, because your people were the ones that brought us rap music, and your people were the ones that were looking at all the internet XXX rated materials, and your people are the ones that are constantly getting thrown in jail for stuff, and you're the incarceration race of people, and you're the rap music race of people, you're the unemployment race of people, you're the drug runner and city mugger race of people, and you're the race of people that we need to steer clear of, and you're the race of people that need to be in gangstalking campaigns, right? That's sort of the attitude here in Miami-Dade County a lot of times. But I've always found that line of thinking to be peculiar, because it's a situation where, okay, yeah, most hip-hop artists were black, and yes, most hip-hop artists came from underprivileged backgrounds, and yes, most hip-hop artists have been to jail for something or another in their life, and yeah, most hip-hop artists are uneducated, and yes, most hip-hop artists are antisocial. But that's what made their music and their stage persona interesting. You got these ghetto guys, or these people that were born in the ghetto, becoming millionaires at 19, 20, 25 years old, just basically putting their antisocial ideas on records to trendy beats. And that became, a phenomena in the United States. And a lot of these hip-hop artists did very well for themselves. They excelled in business. All right, they excelled in music. A lot of these artists won Grammy Awards and Billboard Awards. A lot of these artists were multi-platinum selling artists that changed music. So much, in fact, that there were music artists from other genres that started mimicking the personas and vernacular of hip-hop artists and incorporating it into their own music. Okay, that's what made hip-hop interesting. Okay, it was antisocial, it was rebellious, it was fast-paced, it was risque, it was provocative, it was the underdog presenting his story, his idea of the world around him to the world, and doing it in such a way that was unapologetic, fast-paced, energetic, and basically unique. The U.S. had never seen anything like this before in entertainment. But despite a lot of the artists themselves being black, most of the consumers of rap music in the United States were Caucasian. Most of those multi-platinum selling albums from rap musicians were purchased by white consumers. Most of the ticket sales that were sold to these black hip-hop artists' stage performances were purchased by white concert goers. And most of these world tours that these rappers would go on were patronized and attended by white people. Okay, white people were the world's foremost consumers of rap. Okay, black people listened to it too. I think more so on the internet and on the radio. White people purchased the albums and the MP3 streams and the tickets to the live performances and so forth. And most of that revenue that was going into the hip hop or going into the record labels' bottom lines through their hip hop artists was coming from white Americans. And hip hop was very popular in Europe too, exceptionally popular in Europe, particularly from, I'd say, maybe the year 2000 to the year 2019. So, I mean, to try and find a scapegoat for rap's popularity and trying to heap it upon the shoulders of African Americans solely, that's extremely prejudiced and ill-conceived, because ultimately African Americans made up a small minority of the actual purchasing power of the music industry generally, and I'm starting to suspect that, we'll say, African American males like myself are targeted in part because of the generation I was raised in. I think I've given my gang stalkers more than they bargained for. Okay? When you look at why a person is thrown into a gang stalking campaign, it's for human experimentation purposes. I think the liaisons and undercovers that recommended me for this program looked at me and said, well, you know, he's at this point in time, he's a 16-year-old basketball player at Shaker Heights High School. He's a guy that has a 2.15 GPA. He's a guy that has migrated from the Bible Belt of this country to the Midwestern area. We have people watching him that say he consumes large quantities of this rowdy, raucous music that persons in his demographic are known for. We don't expect this man to contribute much into society. Let's go ahead and use him as one of our guinea pigs. Let's go ahead and use him as a human experiment. Let's go ahead and throw him in a gang stalking campaign. This Emmanuel Isaiah Smith guy, he's expendable. We're going to allow his enemies to plug into his gang stalking campaign and attack him through his liaisons and undercovers. This Smith guy, he'll never figure it out. He'll roll with the punches. His gang stalking campaign might kill him, which at that point, he'll either be buried by his family or we can throw him in a furnace, courtesy of the state. It doesn't make us any different. Life rolls on without this Smith guy, etc., etc. We could use him for human behavior modification mechanisms. We can use him for state-funded human behavioral studies, just like we used to do in MK Ultra. Okay, this is the department. These are the orchestrators of gang stalking talking, right? These are Department of Defense and Department of Justice, or Department of Justice actors here saying this stuff, and I gave them more than they bargained for. They didn't think I was capable of exposing a program such as this. And I think at the present time, their attitude is one of, well, yeah, this millennial black dude, he exposed us and he's done it on the world stage, but we're not going to buckle, we're not going to waver, we're proud Americans, and we think he's unpatriotic, and we don't think he's a responsible American, or we don't think he's a contributing American, and despite him exposing us, we're going to keep this program going. We're going to keep this program going with the expectation that the worst will happen to him. And at some point, people will forget everything he's said. They'll forget everything he's done. We can manipulate him. We can manipulate his legacy. We can manipulate his life story. We can talk about him any way we want, and we can manipulate the minds of the American people to be against this man, and we can basically tear down everything he says as a conspiracy theory, and then we'll choose our next targeted individual and throw them in a gang-stalking campaign, and this time we'll be more careful about it. We won't put together a gang-stalking campaign for a person who might figure us out. Next time, we'll probably put somebody in the gang-stalking campaign who's got either a serious mental defect or a serious learning disability, because if we put somebody like that in a gang-stalking campaign, they'll never figure out what's happening to them. And even if they do, they won't be able to communicate it because they have a learning disability. You see? So when I look at my gang stalkers, the liaisons, the undercover operatives, the stalkers themselves, I don't think they've learned their lesson with me. Okay, they're going to take all this in stride, and then they'll leave behind a blueprint on how to do gang stalking for future generations of gang stalkers. People who want to try domestic terrorism on their own against the American people, who want to find targeted individuals to use domestic terroristic protocols on. They'll leave behind a blueprint for them and basically tell them, make sure you choose a target that has some kind of a speech impediment, or make sure you choose a target that has some kind of a learning disability, or make sure you choose a target that cannot turn around and expose you. You see, it's not going to be, well, we've learned our lesson. We're never going to do this to the American people again. Emmanuel Isaiah Smith has shown us why. Because these types of programs, if exposed, can damage the image and reputation of this country and its auxiliaries. No, they're not going to say that. The orchestrators of gang stalking, the governmental orchestrators of gang stalking, they're going to say, well, yeah, we were exposed this time, but maybe in 50 years, a new generation of stalkers will rise up. And this new generation of stalkers will heed our warnings, and they'll choose targets that have learning disabilities or speech impediments or psychological problems. They'll choose targets that will be less likely to expose them. Right? We chose a target that we thought we could manipulate for his life, for his entire life, and allow him to be cannon fodder for his enemies. But he exposed us and he routed us badly in front of the whole world. But we'll leave behind a blueprint for future stalkers so that they'll be more careful in the targets that they acquire. They will, in the future, choose targets that will be less apt to exposing what they do. And those are the kinds of targets we'll choose for the future. I mean, that's just the nature of the Americans' departments of defense and justice. I mean, they're obviously at the entry level and at the mid level and even at the upper levels. Many of them at the departments of defense and justice have a mindset of law and order, of constitutionality, of rule of law, of protecting and serving the American people, and ensuring that the public trust is upheld with their actions and with their job performance. But let's keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen. When I talk about the Departments of Defense and Justice, okay, I'm talking about clandestine operations. I'm talking about covert operations. I'm talking about the unseen operations that these Departments of Defense and Justice are into. Not everything the Departments of Defense and Justice is cut and dry. Not everything is black and white. Not everything is left and right or up and down and so easy to see by the American people. The Departments of Defense and Justice have long collaborated on clandestine and covert operations, like COINTELPRO, like MK Ultra, like the Sandinistas, like Agent Orange. Okay? There have been lots of covert and clandestine operations that the Departments of Defense and Justice have run over the past 60 years that have resulted in the destruction of the lives of select American people. That is a matter of public record. That is a matter of historical record. The Departments of Defense and Justice run covert and clandestine operations in this country that are aimed at the destruction of American lives for data collection purposes. I assert to you, ladies and gentlemen, that clandestine gangstalking is one such program. And yes, it's financed by you, the taxpayer. And yes, there are factors such as your demographic category, your age, your relationship with others, your relationships with other Americans, and yes, the generation that you were brought up in. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen.